start with the session just to get things going on time, so they have enough time to do their presentation. So I have the great pleasure of being able to introduce Diane and Oscar. So Diane is new with the 21C at the board this year, and Oscar just going to give a little blurb about them and their background. So Diane has taught at Loretto College for the past 10 years before joining the CEC in the 21C department this year. Did a year at Dante and a year at Bishop Allen. You can read her little bio also in the our guide here. And I didn't know this, but she was the executive. She got the Teaching Governor's General Award for Excellence in Teaching, and is also executive director for the Ontario History and Social Science Association of Ontario. Now, she met Oscar, though, because she was Oscar's associate teacher while you were at Loretto College. Now, I've known Oscar in a very different role through the Specialist High Skills Major program, as they had the nonprofit program at the Abbey. So I've gotten to work with him a fair bit. So Oscar has taught also at James Carter Wiggan and Loretto College, but then has been at Loretto Abbey for the last 4 years. He's the co-lead of the nonprofit, as mentioned, and this role has let him focus on a priority for him, which is to connect students to their outside world, sector professionals, and to provide experiential learning opportunities for the class. 3 areas he's currently focusing in his class are the Looking Forward Conference, steeped in history, and his Microsoft Partners in Learning project, which when it did come up, it was a natural fit for Diane and to know that Oscar would be on board with that. So they're going to share their vision and how this project has been going, and take it away. Thank you.
Okay, great. So just to preface, we do have a partnership with Microsoft for this project. However, Microsoft is not providing any funding for this, okay? So $0 and 0 equipment too, so that's awesome. It's an international project. So in my capacity, about once every 3 to 4 weeks, I video conference with educators in Finland and Australia and Indonesia and Hong Kong and the United States. We're the only Canadian representatives, and Oscar's the only Canadian teacher contributing to this project. So when we're done, we have to write this all up, and it's going to go into a MOOC. Who knows what a MOOC is? What is it?
It's kind of like an online resource sharing collaborating platform.
Yeah, it's a massive online open course, so it's like free education. And part of my mission at the board of responsibilities is to build capacity with something called the next lesson, and that's 21st century competencies. So that comes, this is a very international concept, but Microsoft wants to create this MOOC where all these lesson plans and unit plans will be published. We are collecting a lot of documentation and data from the students, from Oscar, and we have to publish it all by May 25th. So that's a preface for the project. The other part of it is that at the board, we've been doing a lot of PD around Mr. Berger that we heard this morning. Burger. Okay, and I'm sure you've all read his book. And so I came upon one chapter, which is about portfolio presentations. It's something I've been thinking about for a while. It's kind of the death of the exam. Sorry if you're happily married to the exam, but I'm not, neither is Oscar. So these 3 quotes kind of stood out to me, and we often spend a lot of time at the board talking. And in my opinion, is anyone from the board here? Not a lot of action. So at the last meeting, I was like, why don't we just take one idea from this book and try it here in Canada, not in a charter school, but in a school, and see if it works, if it doesn't work, collect local data. And so that's what we're hoping to do. So we're taking the idea of the portfolio presentations and trying to make this link among assessment, learning, and student engagement. And kind of stumbling along the way and trying to figure it out. Oscar volunteered his students, and they're fully informed about this process as well, so they're very involved in terms of their voice. What we're trying to do is get students to care about the quality of their work. Now granted, Loretto Abbey, for many of you, you'll be like, this is an easy school to try this, because the kids are fairly complacent, fairly academic, and this is all very true. So we do have that on our side, but also one of the things I started to get concerned about in my last few years of teaching are those students that kind of coast along, and they're not really challenged, and they get kind of like, they get good marks, but when you challenge them, when you really want them to become critical thinkers, they can't do it, right? And they actually push back. They'll say to you, well, why do I have a low mark in your course, when I have high marks in everything else, right? Or parents will say, well, we talk about this a lot, my daughter in grade 8 was like star of the class, level 4 student, now grade 9 she's struggling, and they kind of resist being challenged. So we want to break through and get kids to actually think critically, care about their learning, and not care about their marks. And at his school, that's a challenge, right? But we will say that the kids are cooperative, and we don't have a lot of classroom management issues, so we're not going to hide that fact, okay? Now, just for definition purposes, our definition of a portfolio, and I'm sure this is not a new concept to many people, is the selected body of student work that has a reflection focus, so the kids will write, or the students will write reflections about their progress towards goals. We want them to be thinking like long term and think about where they're going, why are they doing this, and be able to reflect on their best work. Why is it their best work? And not the teacher giving feedback as to why it's the best work. And then apply the skills. Since it's a writer's craft course that we're doing this, it's a skills-based course. The portfolio panel is maybe something that some of you have heard of but have not tried or have not seen it in action in a school. I think you saw some video clips of it in Berger's presentation. But basically it's like getting a panel of professionals and experts who come and listen to the students present on their reflections about their best work. And it takes into account the students' process of learning and evidence, and it's all student-led. We decided to go professionals first, but you can expand it to parents, family members, community members, other grades of students, whatever you think is going to work in your school and with your students. And these are the guiding principles that we sat down and agreed on that we would want to have as our overarching goals. So the first one is that we want to assign work that matters. I remember being a first year, second year teacher and having like 60 marks in my web marks. And then it would be like 1%, 0.5% in weight. And I'm chasing after kids for work that's worth like 0.8%, and you're doing something stupid, but you're so caught up in this cycle that you can't get out of it, right? So we want to really pare that down, assign the work that matters, make connections to the real world so that kids can see why they're learning this and why learning is important. Activating the brain is important. And maybe we could get away from these conversations with kids where they say, well, why am I learning this? I'm never going to use this. But you're actually always going to use your brain, so there is like value to learning. We want to connect to examples of excellence, so having kids see other examples of excellence, because sometimes just like teaching can be very isolating, so can learning when you don't see what other kids are producing. And then all those myths develop, like, oh, she's a smart kid, he's not a smart kid. They don't exactly know why they believe these things, but this culture develops in the class or the school. And then number 3 is a big one. Coming from both teaching all girls, we want to build a culture of critique. So it's very hard. I always struggled with students because they think critique is criticism. And we're trying to explain to them that critique is actually criteria-based thinking. So kind of take the subjective out of it and look at your classmates' work very objectively. And like they said this morning, take accountability for everybody, right? So try to improve everybody in the class. Because sometimes, it's kind of selfish the way kids are vying for marks. And if anyone's saying like, well, I can only have 3 level 4s and 5 level 3s and whatever, you start getting into this whole, well, who's going to be, where are the chips going to fall? So we want to build that culture where students are comfortable giving each other feedback, and the feedback is not like, heart, good job, which is what we struggle with as well. Then the idea of multiple revisions. So if you have struggling writers or struggling students, I found, and we'll show some tools we use to get around this, that once the pen went to the paper or the pencil, there was no way it was going to get redone, right? So it's like final, as soon as it's passed in, whatever, I'm not erasing it, I'm not redoing it. When we use some web tools to get past that barrier. So far it's been very successful, especially with remedial students or students who are like, as soon as I'm done, I'm done. So we want kids to be long-term learning, and we want opportunities for public presentations. So we're going to start small in this project, and we're about halfway through the project, and we're going to go big at the end. So to start, just to kind of get to a sense of who's in the room, we're going to ask you 2 questions. The first one, we're going to use a tool. So in the description, it did say if you have a device to bring it. So if you have a laptop, or if you have a smartphone, I'm going to give you a password for the Wi-Fi, which I'm not really allowed to, but. Okay, Jen, can you grab that piece of paper? And we're going to ask you to turn the page over. So on this, on here you have a link to the presentation. On the back you have the link to an online quizzing tool that we're going to use called Socratic. If you want access to the Wi-Fi, this is the Wi-Fi code. I'm going to give it to you as soon as I finish typing it. Cool, can you see it? It's the one with OSCC018. Very cryptic, all of this. Yeah? Okay. If you have a QR code scanner, then just scan the code on the back of the paper, and that's going to take you to Socratic. If you don't, you're just... Yeah, there's a link, so you just go to Socratic.com. We'll see how this goes. And then if the tech doesn't work for you, don't worry, we'll have also a verbal conversation. But when you get to b.socratic.com, it's going to look like this. Yes? Are we there? Okay, you're going to enter a room, okay? And the room code is Success 2015. And Success has 2 C's and 2 S's, 3 S's. Has anyone used Socratic? I know Paul has. Yes? This is a great tool to get formative assessment, feedback, and student voice in your classes. So that, again, the teacher code, you're joining the room. It's Success 2015. I'm just going to start the quiz. tech. The question is to just talk with an elbow partner about what you think disengages students from learning. So why don't they come to school? Why don't they like school? What disengages students? And up here you'll see that the responses from the room will start to populate. They're anonymous. And we can see if we find any commonalities in our responses. I see already interest showing up 3 times. And just some features I'm so proud of right here, we can see 18 people are in the room. And I control the room, so I can certainly, if I see something come up that's really inappropriate, close the room, okay? Since I'm allowing you to post anonymously, that might not work in this culture. You can also require students to put in their names. So let's talk about some of these responses, and for the low-tech people, or no-tech, then we'll see if you have anything else to add. So what we see here is some commonalities. Lack of interest. So do you have students who are not interested in your classes at the high school level? Great. I always wonder, and I'm sure you've seen these charts where they show like elementary school interest in schools, like, and then high school hits and it's just like boom, right? They disengage and disengage and disengage. So we know that there is a lack of interest and they don't feel interested in the course content. They might be bored, we see that as well. They're afraid of failure, so that's an interesting one. And there's they don't want to take that risk, so they don't put themselves out there. So a lot of kids will disengage as a coping mechanism, right? So that they don't ever experience that sense of failure. Boredom, boring. The direct connection to the world at large is an interesting one. Right? So we're trying to see if that actually gets kids to challenge themselves more, to see a connection to see themselves in something out there in the real world. Because a lot of times school is very contrived, right? It's like a little bubble, and there's all these rules, and there's all these schedules, and we do try to kind of massage the message a little bit in the experience and make it pleasant, and so there is definitely sometimes a lack of connection to the real world. Or we make connections that we think exist, and we'll often say next year when you're in college or you're in university, this is not going to be the way it is, right? And a lot of times, the last time I was in a university or college, it was quite a while ago, right? We maybe don't necessarily know what that's like for them. So we try and we'll say in the real world, you'd be fired, right? So we do all of this messaging as well. Any other ones that are not up here that you think disengages students?
I'm not sure if I'll be off base, but maybe a bit different between academic and applied students, I would think. But not on the list is, I think, the number one thing that's creating most students not to learn, and it's in your hands.
Sorry?
It's in your
Oh,
hands.
right. Technological distractions.
At least 90% of students in most classes that go
Yeah.
is engaged in this, and it's not educational.
Yeah.
Some even go so far, some teachers allow it to have 2 headphones on while the teacher is lecturing.
Yeah, it's
It
path of
baffles
least
me.
resistance. I think that there are reasons why that are up here that connect to that, why they want to go to that world, right? Why do they want to disengage and be engaged in these non-academic things, right? And I don't have answers for this, guys. I'm not going to present a magical solution. But what we're trying to see is if we can make something more authentic for them and make them care about the quality of their work because their work is going somewhere. So yes, it puts added stresses on us and on students because somebody is coming, that's not us, to see your work. And if you go parents and family members, then there's that kind of added, respect level that they don't want to, look a certain way in front of their family members. But it's going to something other than a piece of paper and to the teacher only as the viewer. So that's what we're kind of experimenting with. As a tool here, just, to pitch Socratic to you, you can also remove answers here. So if you see some things that are repeated, so if we take the bunch of interested ones, you can get your top 5, for instance, and then have kids vote on what's going to be the top, or have them grapple with those top 5, right? So it's a really good way to get quiet voices activated in the class. And if they are of the generation where, quite frankly, this phone is an extension of their hand at this point, it's like another limb, then we can kind of guide them towards how it can be used academically in small steps, right? I'm not saying you're not going to have resistance, but it's a one kind of experiment that you can do. Okay, so what we want to do is avoid this, right? And also for us too. I don't know if you're in moment right now, so this is the best week ever, surplus week, woo! Counting down the days and the hours and the months until summer. And, counting down the hours till 2:34 or 2:45 or whatever, right? From the teacher side, I think, is this also to kind of give some excitement to teachers, change it up, look forward to something, have some good anxiety as opposed to bad anxiety, which we're going to talk about today, and have kids want to come to school. So that's our goal. And our other goal is to do this, which is, I think, kind of hard, is to keep all of these 3 parts at the same level. So keep them all at the forefront. And by doing that, sometimes I think if we make learning and engagement our primary focus, we don't want to go to assessment because it hurts feelings. And I always think about, when you first start a course, you're in the honeymoon period until the first assessment, right? And then we break up with the students, right? They don't like us anymore, it becomes personal, you see a mood shift, and then sometimes when you're marking personally, right? Because that kid, pisses you off, and you just, I don't know if it's just me or whatever. You mark and you're like, I gotta stop marking because I'm feeling angry when I mark because this kid doesn't get it, this kid doesn't get it, this kid doesn't get it. So you have to actually walk away from the pile, right? And then the psychological, piles and piles of papers that you carry everywhere with you, and then you create them back and forth. Yeah, right? Shuffle them and put smart, not smart, smart, not smart. All the things. You count them. How many rows? There'll still be 8 left. It's just 10 an hour ago. Yeah. So if we go on that end, then maybe assessment takes a back seat because we don't want to get the kids disengaged because they're not doing well, right? And we hide the marks and we don't talk about the marks. And then if we go too heavy on assessment, we're assessing too often, too much, and then everything is worth so much that the kids can't decipher what's an overall versus a specific expectation, and when should they care and when should they not care, and all this stuff, right? So we want to keep them all at the same level. And make it transparent too, because sometimes I think the contributor of bad anxiety is the kids do not know how much something is worth, when is it worth something, when is it coming, all this kind of anxiety around when they have to perform. So we're going to take a quick glance at Oscar's students and how he got to know them.
Okay, so a couple of things. So first of all, Dan kind of spoke about the jargon and a lot of things that kind of underpin what we're doing. I'm a teacher that I've been at different schools, and I really like any kind of new opportunity that throws me to something that I just don't know what's going to happen, because that's how I feel that I learn the most. In terms of my class, though, one thing that I do want to say is my class, I do teach at Royal Abbey. There's 32 students there. It's a grade 12 U Writer's Craft course. It's a pretty large class. However, there's still a great deal of diversity within my class. So at the beginning of the year, one thing that I kind of do with my students is I create kind of a Google Doc, Google Forms. Let's see if I can actually do this.
I'll do this.
Thank you. So I create kind of a Google Forms with my students at the beginning of the year. So September 14th, I asked them some different questions. I want to see where they were at, and I kind of want to see, because Writer's Craft is one of those beautiful courses that the expectations aren't that extensive, that you can really go to where the kids want to go. And ask them different questions. So like, what's your first, last name? And then the questions kind of range from, your last year, how are you feeling? I just want to see where the anxiety was at with my grade 12s. To things like, writer's craft is an elective course, why are you here? You don't have to be in this class, but why did you choose writer's craft? Because I think that that's an important question to ask. And it goes from all the way there to, what can I do as a teacher? And if you go, Dan, if you want to go to that list over here, so if you use this, students can fill it out, and if you want to go to form and look at the summary tool, and if you go to show summary of responses afterwards, you as a teacher, that's okay. What ends up happening actually is that you get this beautiful kind of pie chart of everything that the students send, and all their responses as well, so that you as a teacher can kind of see where they're at. Because I know that beforehand I would do this via paper, and I'd get them to do it, and now online it's just so much easier for me to kind of keep track of everything as well. And also too for me to see, like when students come up to me and they say something like, oh sir, I hate critiquing, or I hate this, and I can say, okay, let's go at the beginning of the year, what are your challenges that you're working on, what do you want to work on, and etc. So that's there, and these are all their responses that they're all there, and actually afterwards it does show you kind of a beautiful chart afterwards. So it's something that you can use, it's something that I'm using, and also use at the end of the class here, right? This is the course, what's your favorite assignment, what's the assignment you don't like, what did I do well as a teacher, what's something I can do. Sometimes they're harsh, but that's how you learn, right? Which is kind of interesting, so feel free to use that as well. If you go back to the presentation, so my students, why did you take the course? The answers vary. I have some kids who said I take the course because literally I write when I'm bored, I write when I'm depressed, when I'm content I write, when it rains I write, when it's sunny I write, you get the picture. So I have some of those students in my class, they're literally, they want to write, no matter what. So those students are pretty easy to engage. Then you also have students that said writing's always been an escape for me, but they kind of really want to work on that expression. They want to express themselves a little bit more clearly. So that would probably be the majority of my students, but I do have some students who are like, I didn't know what else to take, so I said, why not? Right? I'm here in my class, it's period 2, so that way they get their period 4 spares. Right? So sometimes I do have those students as well, so it's a little bit of diversity there. When I ask them, what are your goals and expectations for this course? The number one thing that, and Dan kind of alluded to this with my school, it's marks, especially grade 12, marks, university, marks. That's all I get. So if you look at this, to achieve a good mark and learn more about literature. Okay? To learn and gain better writing skills for university, so we're thinking about university right away. I hope you pass with a generally okay mark and expect this to be difficult or semi-difficult. So you kind of get that resistance right away from the beginning. Might have been because I taught them before, might have been, I don't know, but they kind of feel like I might make it a little bit more difficult for them, but that the mark is there at the forefront. Have some students who are very specific, like I have to get better at poems. It's not debatable at this point, right? I just have to get better at poetry. So some students are super specific. And then if you go to the next slide, Dan. We also get this, I really want to share my work. So many of my students say, I write things and I actually want to share with others, but I'm scared of doing that. Right? I want to do that, but I'm scared. That's number one. And then the last one's like, I'm expecting fun. So they want to have that super engaging class. A lot of fun. I know it's going to be a difficult course, etc., but I'm expecting the class to be a place where I can freely express myself and enjoy writing. And Mr. Lopes, you have a lot to live up to. So a lot of that whole thing, I want it to be fun, engaging, but at the same time, marks. So we get that kind of sense of like that learning, that engagement, and then the assessment piece. And I find that with my class, kind of like what Diane was saying, I always get stressed around February because that's OUAC transitions to university, right? And that's when I get my grade 12s, especially when they're really, like, the anxiety is pretty high. And even just right now, they just got their midterms, they're actually, the next one's last week. So, and you sense that in the classroom, right? In terms of like attendance and everything. When I ask them, what can I do as a teacher to have a positive experience in this course? I kind of did a wordle of their responses. So you see a lot of my kids really do want to write. They actually want work. They want suggestions. But the thing that came up over and over was feedback. I want to receive feedback, and I want to receive feedback that is constructive. I want to get better as a writer, right? Which is something that I think we all do all the time. But to understand that students do want feedback. Right? They might be scared of receiving it, but they do want it, especially at the beginning of the year with my students. Okay, so my class. Pretty much I got a couple things I really want to say. With this opportunity, I have my writer's craft class. It's my 3rd time teaching it ever in my career. I'm changing up this year a lot. When I got when Diane and Daniel said, listen, Microsoft is having this potential thing, would you like to do this? And I said, sure, why not? And I also said, will you help me? Right? Because I knew that this was going to be a little bit difficult. I do teach about 172 students. It's a full year school. right? Tons of marking. And I said, will you help me? So please understand that Diane and Daniel did help me. They're board resource people, and I want you to understand that. Would I have done this beforehand? I would have tried. Would have been difficult? Yes. Now that I see the value in it, would I do it on my own? Probably yes. Would I try to convince my department members to help me out with it? Definitely. It's very valuable, but please understand that Diane did help out a lot, and Daniel, so understand that. Before my class, my poetry unit. So my poetry unit is my second last unit before my summative. And what we did with the kids, with my students, is we did tons of analysis, tons of creation. Analysis, creation for like a good 5 weeks nonstop. And then they would have their culminating. Normally they're culminating, they would choose like their best pieces of work, and then they would present it to the class. Okay? This was before. With my summative, it's kind of nice. My school, we don't have an exam for writer's craft. I kind of asked for that because I feel like it's just counterintuitive for the entire course. What they have to do is they have to have a portfolio where they're curating their work from the beginning to the end, especially with work that I don't collect for marks. So it's part of their portfolio. It has to go there. And then they have to reflect on their portfolio. They have a gigantic project that they're working on that's due in about 2 weeks, actually a little bit longer. And then they have to present on their project. This was before Diane joined. It's changing a bit.
So this kind of catchy phrase, growth mindset, here like every 2 minutes at the board. But what we think it means is that we kind of want these kids to understand how their brains grow, right? And when they experience some of this anxiety, or there's a lot of mental health issues that are now all talked about quite significantly, and they feel like they don't want to do something, right? So they might stay home and pretend that they're sick, or actually feel sick because they don't want to perform that day. That maybe some of that can be positive, right? That when you're kind of outside your comfort zone, you can almost physically feel your brain growing, right? So change sort of that imagery of feeling anxious and feeling like you want to avoid something into understanding that that's kind of how your brain is telling you you're growing. Since your brain is kind of hardwired to sit at home, relax, eat bad food, and chill out, right? You almost like have to battle against your instincts. So we want to focus on growth and to have that conversation with students. Focus on multiple drafts of work, so not giving up, perseverance, knowing who to ask, when to ask, and to revise their work. So, and then a lot of it is documentation, right? So having the evidence students can look back on. So when they see their responses at the beginning of the year to that intro activity, they can go back and see what they were thinking in September. And it's not, descriptive feedback on a piece of paper that's thrown at the bottom of a locker, right? So what do they examine? We want to give them work, quality work, that they can examine over time and use it to set their own goals. And it can be very painful because, not so much at Loretto Abbey, but when I was at Loretto Abbey's slightly poorer cousin, Loretto College, I would have students say, just tell me what to do, just tell me what to do, and they want steps 1 to 15, micromanage, right? And so I would tell them, well, you set your own goals. And they would stare at me like they have never heard of this idea of setting goals, right? So it can be very painful. But over time, it becomes less painful. So one of the things that I noticed in teaching is that I never got, even if I told you, what is my mark? Is this for marks? Around midterm, it would stop, right? So then they started asking, is this for feedback, right? And so it was like this shift, and then the whole tense feeling of the classroom kind of eased, and everybody could breathe a little bit, right? Because feedback, you don't necessarily have to stay home on a feedback day, because it's a low-stress day, right? Yes, there are still healthy stress moments where we want them to produce, but we want kids to develop skills that are connected to what employers are saying they need for the 21st century. So the two that we're focusing on are real-world problem solving and innovation, and we've got 2. The focus for the poetry unit is how can poetry be used as social justice resistance to oppression, okay? How can words change the world, right? And for our second level is how can you prepare for the real world? So develop your portfolio, create an online presence, and actually make the transition to the real world, right? And self-regulation, which I'm sure many of you have heard of and know about, but this whole idea of lifelong learning and revising work based on feedback and kind of like a continuous cycle. So, what we have done, currently where we are right now.
So a couple of things. First of all, with this class, especially from the beginning of Writer's Craft, I'm not a published poet, I'm not a published newspaper writer, reporter, I'm not a published novelist either, right? I do kind of, I get a sense of it from my university courses, I can read a textbook, I can teach myself as well, I do enjoy literature and poetry. However, I'm not published, so kind of what I really wanted this year is kind of get, and especially with Diane's help and with the board's help, to get real-life professionals working with my students. So the first thing is, even before this Microsoft, I was doing a journalism unit with my students, and I wanted my students to look around the school and showcase their voice, and I would hand in their news articles to our principal. Because I wanted them to make their voice to go outside my classroom. And right away at the beginning, I got students writing about their opinions, which is not newspaper writing. And then what ended up happening is we taught the course, and then I Skyped a former Loretto College student when I was there, a former grad, Daniela DaCosta, and she's actually a journalist, and she's been picked up by the Huffington Post. She wrote for Ryerson, she attended Ryerson, and she Skyped my class for free, because no money, and my students got to ask her questions about journalism, and they got to ask her different questions about where they were at. They started writing their process, and then they asked questions like, I'm stuck here. And 75% of the things that Daniela said were covered in our textbook. But it's not the same. When they hear it from Daniela, when they hear it from someone who's kind of close to their age range, with someone who's actually published, all of a sudden it magically makes sense. Right? The student raised, I remember a student raised her hand because she wanted to talk about how our school hates the art students, right? They just love science, but they hate arts. And she's like, I'm having difficulty finding evidence to back up my opinion. And then she looked at them and she's like, listen, if you want to write a novel, just don't call it journalism. Right? And you have someone who could say stuff like that. It was very tough, she was very tough with the kids. And she's like, this is what journalism is. You have integrity. You go out, you research, then you present your findings, not the other way around. Right? So having that conversation was great. A lot of students had to go back and restart the process again. And it's kind of different. It's not me saying it, and then they would say, you just don't want us to trash the school. That's kind of what they would say. It's someone else saying it, which adds a lot of authenticity to it. Now, also my class with poetry unit, I wanted to kind of go outside of the classroom, outside of the students, and wanted to reach outside of the class. So Dan and Daniel linked me with the Global Center for Global Education. And they're actually having a Skype session April 30th, where we get to Skype Egypt. And our students get to talk to a resistance poet in Egypt and get to perform some of their poetry. So I told the students, we're going to do that. They were like, why are we doing that? They were scared. They're like, our poetry's not going to be great. And then what ended up happening is that we kind of scaffolded from the beginning all the way till then so that we can get ready. It's going to be April 30th, but we have been scaffolding. So the first thing that we did with the students is, I hope there's a picture next, is we really connected them with professionals, right? And this is where we got a Loretto College grad as well, another one, Erica Sadri.
Notice we're always getting Loretto College grads,
Well,
not Loretto Abbey grads.
I only started 3 years ago, so you have to pull from the graduates you taught. But a couple of things. One, Erica Sadri from Loretto College, she came in, spoken word artist, and she spoke to my students. And she presented spoken word to my students. And then you have John River, who's a pretty up-and-coming, famous rapper. And he came in, he did spoken word. And we had 2 students who were close to their age, to my students, helping them out, sharing their work. And the most important thing is that they were answering their questions. And they were answering their questions in a way that I don't answer their questions. Right? Because I have to teach poetry in a very specific way. Let's look at literary devices. And when someone asked Erica, do you write with literary devices in mind? And she's like, no, it just comes naturally. Right? Not all my students can do that. So, and it's nice because she's doing something that I don't normally say. Could you imagine talking to someone like, write an essay, it will come flow naturally. For some students, it will do that, right? But for other students, you don't. So you get a voice that I don't naturally do or use in class, which is great. And then John as well.
It's a key point here is that one of the things that just, I don't know, never was an intention, but I keep tabs on graduates, right? So once a year I might tweet, find them on Twitter, tweet and say, hey, what's up, what are you up to? Or I'll identify in my head grade 12s and I'll say to them on, in the last year, you are going to be somebody. Keep in contact with me because I know you're going to do great things and we can always use you as an example of excellence, right? So I keep tabs on these people, right? And then you'd be surprised what they end up doing. I've seen graduates on covers of magazines, they're starting their own businesses, and so even kids you think aren't going to do great things end up doing great things. So we want to show kids people that they can see themselves in, right? The other person we used was a professor. I mean, kids might not see themselves in a professor, but we also wanted to bring it to kind of another level as well.
And it was really interesting. I got a professor from the University of Toronto, Dan Kahn actually, a professor from the University of Toronto Scarborough campus, who teaches poetry. For one class, he delivered half lecture, half writing. My kids got that for free. He was so happy to do it. Right? He was so happy to do it. The kids learned so much. Again, you get that kind of like, and a lot of the students, when I ask them, they're like, sir, you provide kind of like the overall framework. These students really answer specific questions, which is kind of interesting. And it's so nice because I get to learn too. That's the best part. I took like 3 pages of notes on the professor. And we're really working on that feedback with the students, that they write something, they get feedback from peers, from me, from professionals, and then they go back to themselves, right? And the best part is when students get conflicting feedback, then they're forced to ask, well, right? Where should I go from this, right?
Yeah. So that they can lead their own learning, right? So sometimes they feel like students will take any teacher feedback because the teacher gave it. So they'll, even if they don't agree with it or don't understand it, they'll try to incorporate it, right? So here they have different forms of feedback and they have to make the decision. They select what will create their best work. So again, it's transferring some of that responsibility. We're running out of time, so one of the ways that we would get that feedback, for instance, on Thursday, we're bringing Erica and John River back to be the panel for a mini poetry slam. Since they do have to go before a panel on May 12th, we want to give them a practice. So kind of a dry run, so they're used to the idea of how to present, what to say, and how they're going to get that feedback. So we're using Google Forms for that. So how do you guys do this? One, keep track of your grads, right? If you have an alumni association, get in touch with them. What are these people doing? Get to know your students. What family members do they have? What do their parents do? What do their siblings do? Like, you'd be surprised how you can create this network almost immediately of people who can come in, and they love to come in. I think people have a romantic idea of what it means to be a teacher in education. They want to come in and be like a Hollywood movie and save the kids type of thing. So capitalize on that. These 3 organizations have been fantastic for us. The Center for Global Education, if you go to their website, they have events, video conferences, where you can connect to stem cell researchers, deforest action, art as resistance, poetry as resistance, RCMP tackling cyberbullying, Government of Canada policymakers, climate change. You know, if anyone's from Madonna in here, your students, such a global education focused school, are doing all kinds of things with the Center for Global Education, right? So consider looking into that. Skype in the classroom, super easy. Register, indicate what topics you're looking for, pick the people that come up. Classrooms will come up from around the world, teachers saying, hey, I want to collaborate on a pen pal project. Then they'll email you and say, hey, you selected me, and I'll agree to Skype with your classroom. Some of them will say like, oh, it'd be nice if your kids bought my book or something like that. But other ones are just totally free. And then our school board, keep this in the back of your mind. We are currently, one of my missions before I get surplus, is to make a partnership with Taking It Global. So if you feel like in your school you could partner up with 2 or 3 people, we're going to offer the opportunity to get certified as global educators with Taking It Global before the end of this year. Because if we don't use the funding, we'll never get it again. And this organization connects with projects all around the world, civic, global citizenship projects. And if you're interested, come to me before you go, give me your name and your school, and then I'll feed you the information, okay? And then we're hoping that we'll get to the point where your school could be branded, it's kind of a marketing thing, as a future-friendly school, right? And so those 3 things can help you out.
Okay, we are working towards a couple things. April 16th, this Thursday, we're having a poetry slam in my classroom, and we're going to bring back the real world kind of professionals to kind of assess my students and give feedback. I'm looking forward to that. April 30th, we are Skyping with the Egyptian poet. May 12th, that's the day, and if you remember kind of what we saw in the main morning, when someone was talking in front of a group of people, we're going to do that May 12th, where students are going to be presenting their work for my class, including their culminating project, to a different panel of, so about 2 professionals. We're now like 4 or 5 different panels, and each student will talk to 2 professionals and explain their work and kind of show their learning and try to get feedback as well. Do you want to keep going?
Yes, so how did we plan this day? My first tip is to plan. So I wouldn't do this in every unit. This is part of a well, it's not called that anymore, CPT, right? So the course performance task. You know, inform students and see what role they see themselves playing. Scaffold the process, so the practice with the mini poetry slam, so they're used to the panel. Incorporate revision in the culture of revision, so they understand that these people are not evaluating you, they're giving you feedback so that you can then submit your final for evaluation.
I just want to say one thing that's kind of important with the scaffolding and revision. My students, they're actually really scared about getting professionals to see their work,
Yeah.
right? And what they're saying is, sir, they're going to see us, and when you reframe it and you say, you know what, these people want to come here and help you out. It's not mark-based, because they're not allowed to mark you, right? They really just want to come here and take the time. And Dan found someone who's actually flying in from New Brunswick,
Yeah.
right?
For free.
For free, to see your work. And they want to give you advice. That's what it is. You want to learn? Take this opportunity, right? That's what learning is. It's not for marks, it's just for your own learning. And will I mark anything? Yeah, your reflection of it. That's what I'm looking for, right? This is your presentation, I want to look at your reflection, your growth, right? But really take that opportunity. So
Before Oscar, I'm like go big or go home. I want to like stack it with this panel of professionals, and he's just like, oh, we can like start slow and small, right? So I'm like, let's get Margaret Atwood, right? So I'm currently harassing Margaret Atwood on Twitter. You have to be shameless, right? So it's 5-10 times a day. I'm gonna find out who Margaret Atwood's PR person is. Anyone I find in the literary world, I ask them, do you know Margaret Atwood? How can I contact Margaret Atwood? Anyone I found out who was a Toronto Star book reviewer or critic, anyone who I found out was a poet laureate, who knows, the city of Toronto has a poet laureate, right? George Eliot Clark. That guy was so helpful, okay? So he passed our request along to all these poets. You think they're not going to respond. It's true, some people don't respond. Margaret is ignoring us. But she will eventually have to cave, right? So I started on March break emailing universities, colleges, newspapers, poetry slam organizations, whoever. I emailed 31 people, right? So I just made a form, copied and pasted, sent it all out. What ended up happening is that people started forwarding that all over the place. They posted it on forums, and I got so many responses. In the beginning, I was like, oh my god, we're not going to get anybody. We're like, oh, let's go get like a Loretto sister and like my cousin, right? So, but then we got all of these people saying, oh my god, this is fantastic. I like this idea so much. I wish somebody had done this for me. It's such a wonderful endeavor. And I used to go to Loretto Abbey, and my mom went there. And then it just happened like serendipitously.
people would send us their resumes.
Yeah, they were sending resumes to apply.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, you know this isn't for money. And they're like, yes, we totally understand, but we love this initiative. We want to be involved. Telling us, like, kind of proving that they deserve, this is the guy from New Brunswick, that they deserve to be involved in this. And we have really, people who have won a lot of prestigious awards are coming on May 12th. Now, our final list is here.
As Diane's put it, that's the one interesting thing, like how easy it was to get people to buy in.
Yes.
I wasn't expecting that at all. I was expecting that I'd have to ask like personal favors of people, right? But it was actually relatively easy.
Yeah, so these are the 31 that we asked, and here's our confirmed. We had to actually like reject people, right? So we'd be like, she doesn't sound good enough. So, I'm kind of like a sort of a feminist, so I lean towards having women come, but we're trying to do a gender balance. We're still open to having a few other people come to the panel, but it's shaping up to be a pretty exciting day. And I don't think it is, honestly, it really wasn't that difficult. Like, I did not sweat at all trying to get these people to come.
The day of might be stressful.
Yeah.
The May 12th.
But it's good stress.
It's good stress.
Yeah.
And a couple of things, and even like if you have students, like I have a student who came up and you say, like presenting is not my forte. We're having some people who've actually presented in the past, right? So that Danielle DeCosta's implemented. So have that student go to that panelist because you have that prior knowledge as well. So it's kind of interesting. So challenges, I'm going to talk about the challenges. So first of all, that final portfolio audience, that's going to be, especially with our school, like spacing, like how am I going to get 4 small rooms to host these people?
And currently right now, we don't have an idea for where the final one of it goes. So it's their first year, like after the professionals give them feedback and they're doing their final one, they're submitting it to Mr. Lopez for evaluation as part of their 30, that's not living anywhere yet.
Yeah,
So,
and that kind of actually goes with, it goes a little bit lower down to digital, non-digital. We're going to work on having students digitize their portfolio online, but make it dead, so that way only I see it with the link. And then afterwards, when they go to universities, because we're looking at that digital citizenship, right? What shows up when someone Googles your name? If I was a student, I would like my writing portfolio to show up if someone Googles my name.
and they're
Right.
nervous about this, so we try to jazz it up, like we're doing a photo shoot,
With
so
them.
they can get their professional, like, portfolio picture taken for the website, right? So they're super into that. And then they get to select what goes in the portfolio, so they can start building this. And had a professor say it's really good because the second year students in their English and creative writing programs have to start at that point. This is a little bit of a head start for them. And a lot of employers are asking for digital portfolios now, not resumes, right?
A
So,
couple of other challenges, like with me, that conflicting information. You know how like sometimes they say, you know what, students know more about you in regards to tech than you do sometimes? Like I'm that person that like, I find that I know more about tech than students do, so I never had that experience. However, bringing in a professional who's like a poet coming in, there's no doubt in my mind that that person knows much more than I do, right? So that was like a little bit stressful at first. I got over it. I feel like we did district review last year and everyone just comes into my classroom and at the point I just don't care about anything. Because I'm like, I do my best and that's all I can do, right? And then if I can learn, I can learn. But it's kind of interesting when someone says this. Like I had a guest speaker come in and said, when I went to first year of Ryerson, the teacher said this, hands up if you took writer's craft, which is my course, and everyone raised their hand. And she's like, my teacher said, well, forget everything they taught you in writer's craft. And I'm like, oh my God, she actually saying this to my students. And afterwards, so students like, sir, we have to forget everything you tell us, right? And I'm like, and then you have to be critical about it, right? What did she say? Did I mention those things in classroom before, right? And that's kind of that interesting thing, right? Like oftentimes students feel like, okay, I've learned this class, got the grade, and they kind of forget those skills. And it's that whole thing of like, what do you do with conflicting information? How do you choose? What do you want to have? Like that's how you develop voice in writing, right? You don't copy someone, you pick and choose and you kind of work with it. That's kind of important. That exemplars, I've done portfolios in the past. I actually have like the traditional portfolios. I have my teacher's college portfolio I can give to them as well. I don't have any digital portfolios yet, so we're going to work on that. I hope after this year we'll have those
you're
digital
gonna make a
portfolios.
fake one.
Yeah. And that whole thing of digital versus non-digital for equity in the classroom, I'm booking laptops so our students could do that in the classroom, but just ensuring that like, if a student really wants to do it non-digitally, like, I'm giving them that option as well. That good versus bad anxiety, having that conversations with my students, like, sir, like, I'm really stressed about this, or anxiety, like, that's normal. Right? Anxiety is something that's normal. Are you prepped for it? Can you ask these people questions? When we had the professor come in, and students had their work done, the questions they were asking him were ridiculously good because they knew that they were going to have to perform it outside. And the questions were purposeful, right? And the questions were like, you knew that those students were going to go back and change their work based on the feedback. And that's something that I've encountered before with me personally, but I haven't encountered someone do that with a peer or with someone else. And that was really nice because sometimes it's too much for you yourself to make 32 pieces of work, give so much feedback, and then for them sometimes not to use it, for hopefully most of the time that they are using it.
For culture change, it's obviously we're starting this in one class, and there's 3 of us organizing this. We'd like for it to, live and be born into something that becomes a rite of passage. So if this is what all grade 12s do, and then there's something like a learning fair where we actually demonstrate our learning, show our learning, reflect on our learning, and not just spend 3 hours trying to make our hands right when we never have written for 3 hours before, right? So I think it's a little bit more practical in terms of kids having a say in their evaluation and in their progress.
And is it worth it? Because we're almost running out of time. I just want to read 2 quotes, the second and the third one. So I asked my students, email me if it's worth it or not. And I got some students email me. Here's the second one. From one of my students who likes writing so much. She's one of those people that like writes all the time. And she says this, I think having professionals come to our class, present their work, and give feedback is a pretty cool thing. We get told often, or I rather, not to be a writer, to pursue something else outside of literature, pursue something more sciencey, where you can actually get a real job. I feel like it just proves that you can make it as a writer, and that you can also help contribute, change the world through words, which is important because that student is one of those people who lives to write. And it's nice for her to have someone beyond a teacher, an English teacher, have people come in who are making a living, who are happy doing what they are doing, right? And that was an interesting. And even the third one is great. Let's go back one. I can sit in class and I can learn from a teacher and a textbook, but I truly experience a lesson when I'm in the midst of professionals. the core meaning to how it shapes them as a person. Learning becomes much more of a human experience, right? It's outside of the class it becomes human. And oftentimes students said, you know what, sir, what you provide is great. It's a great intro basis, but I really like the professionals. They fill in like those questions that you really want to know. And then they can always go back to me afterwards and ask, like, what do you think now, right? Because they often say that they're much more comfortable talking to me as well, but that the information they get from the professionals is invaluable to them.
So that's where we are, and that's where it's going. If you have any questions, you can ask us. We are a little like 3 minutes over time. But thank you so much for attending and for participating today.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, but also, I don't know about you. You scared me when you said that you actually know more than your students in terms of technology. Not more, but you're on par, because that scared, I am so out of touch with all the technology right now that kudos to you, but thank you for sharing all those also things that you're using in the class that are new to many of us here and for this project. It's fabulous. Thank you so much. All your work went into this. Thanks.